Hi, welcome everyone. We will be taking a minute to let people into the webinar. It is about 2 o'clock, and we'll give people a minute to get ready, get in. We're getting everyone in now, and we'll probably start in about a minute and get this show on the road. Thanks, everyone. Ooh. We have a wonderfully representative group of people here in the audience today. And we have a really strong cross-section of Intercity practitioners doing presentations. So I'm very excited to have us all here. Okay. Oh, hello, Dawn and Fred. Woo. We have 65 people on, 66. Okay. I'm gonna start this show. Okay, so if you're here for the Intercity Bus webinar, you're in the right place. We're going to get started now. I'm Robin Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of the National Rural Transit Assistance Program, and we partner with the TRB Intercity Bus Subcommittee to bring issues around intercity bus training, technical assistance as needed, and to share resources, ideas, and information about the industry as it is now and as we wish it could be. What are the opportunities? What are the potential? So today, they'll just do a little housekeeping here. The recording, the slides, everything will be posted on National RTAP training and webinars. You'll be able to come back and capture things that you might have missed. You're able to enter questions in the Q&A box in Zoom to be addressed at the end. Please also use the chat. It's a great place for people to share sidebar, but also we want to make sure out of both places, I think there's room for both discussions. It's a benefit of Zoom. If you're having trouble with Zoom, please chat us, let us know, and we'll see what we can do to help you make your Zoom work or get your Zoom working. Please fill out at the very end. We'll put out a post-webinar survey. It's like 4 questions. It really helps us, especially with this group. Oftentimes with intercity operators, we don't have a whole lot of points of contact. So helping us, giving us feedback on this webinar, what you'd like to see, really helps us build our next webinar and bring the information you're interested in to the table. All of you who are stakeholders for the Intercity program and Intercity services are our audience, and we are here to support you. Please stay tuned for additional webinars on this topic. We're generally planning on doing at least 2 a year, and our conference, the National RTAP conference, is coming up in December next year, and we are looking forward to getting multiple sessions from intercity operators and from this group to be part of that conference. For those of you who have not checked into the National RTAP website, the National Rural Transit Assistance Program is a fully funded FTA technical assistance program. So the resources we provide are available to you for free. We have training materials, technical assistance. We put together webinars like this. We do roundtables, and we are comprised of, actually now this is wrong, it's 15 people, 7 state DOT, 7 transit managers, and at least 1 tribal representative on our board, because the 5311C is the tribal program. We do training, so we have videos, e-learning, slides. We do So we have actual driver training, scheduling and dispatching, safety, emergency procedures, all sorts of stuff on our website. Active shooter is one of the ones that we put out last year. We're working on a passenger ELDT that'll be available for people. It's a theory course for free. We provide information on best practices, tech briefs, toolkits, so you can find out more about how to utilize the 5311 grant program. Technology tool, that's a procurement pro, is to assist with federal procurement. Cost allocation is to, when you're thinking about doing a partnership, understanding what your costs are, your cost per hour, your cost per mile, so that you're able to make a good partnership. Website building if you need to upgrade your website, and GTFS. So those of you who have services that are fixed route, we have tools to help you get your schedule and route information into GTFS, and that is also free. Peer networking, such as this, is an important part of our program where we get feedback from you on the training materials and resources that we need to develop. And assistance, we can connect you with others, connect you with the support you're looking for, and help you do what you're trying to do. FTA funds 6 technical assistance centers, and a lot of the materials we have can be used in other, to help coordinate resources, services in different aspects of transportation and mobility management. So this is, Tackle is a library. And you can go in and ask questions, and it'll give you resources around coordinating services at soup to nuts, service to policy resources. Today we have 5 presenters, and I will ask them to do more in-depth reporting, but or about who they are and introductions. First, it'll be Fred Frobel from KFH. He is the father of Intercity bus research. He's the person that got me into research and into my job as an Intercity bus program manager in Oregon, oh so long ago. And then we will be having Hart and Avery from DPRT and North Carolina DOT to talk about cross-state connector that they are putting together for North Carolina and Virginia. And we'll have Jonah Friedman, project manager at ITRI. He has been working with the North Carolina program in total and supporting the intercity bus development in North Carolina. Don Chartok will close us out with a discussion both from the MTAP perspective and from the Washington State DOT perspective, where they have a very strong and very integrated program working with private operators, public transit, and building networks of service throughout Washington State. So with that, go Fred. And I can hand you the slide control if you would like. Would you like me to do it, or would you like to do it?
You do it. You do it. I'll just
Okay.
say next, whatever.
Okay.
So anyway, let me just start by saying I am blown away to see 91 participants. I can remember a day when these kind of webinars would draw the 6 people, and that was it. So I'm really glad everybody dialed in, and I'm hoping this community continues to grow. I've been doing intercity bus planning as part of rural public transportation planning for a long time. Our friends from North Carolina probably don't realize that going back in history, I think my first statewide intercity bus plan was for North Carolina DOT when I was a graduate student, like in 1978 or something. It was typed on a typewriter. It's that old. But anyway, we're trying to keep on top of it. That's what this is about. So today, everybody gave me a hard time because I have 19 slides, but I'm going to try and cut through them quickly. The first thing the overview that I wanted to talk about is we are now underway with a project that's been a while coming, and it is basically updating a study that TCRP did in 2002. At that point, we were the contractors for TCRP, and we did a project that produced this document, which I don't know if you could still get it, a hard copy of it, but you could download it from TCRP 79, Effective Approaches to Meeting Rural Intercity Bus Transportation Needs. And basically it gave kind of a status report on the industry, the federal programs, and all of the different kinds of things that states were doing and could do. And then it provided some kind of general models that states could be following. So we're trying to update that. We wrote a problem statement. Well, a couple of years back, there was a poll that National RTAP and the TRB Intercity Bus Committee put out to kind of ask what research needs there were. And a lot of them all fell together with the need to update this report and really cover a lot of different things in one project. So really, this research, thank you for advancing it, Robin. Anyway, you're keeping up with
I'm
me.
psychic.
Vice
I'm
versa.
totally psychic.
We have always been on a mind link anyway. So it's really to update this report, but obviously there's a lot that's happened since 2002. And so that's really what we're focusing on, is finding out what the states have done with it, how the federal programs have changed, and then providing strategies and tools to states to continue to develop their intercity bus facilities. And it's a very important time to do this because this is an industry and a time when intercity bus in particular is in a transition in the post-COVID era with restructuring. So it's really important to do. So this slide kind of lays out what the core questions are that came out of the RFP that the panel put together. TCRP has a panel for each of its projects, and I should introduce Avery Daughtry, who's our panel chair. He's on the call today, and Avery, feel free to correct me with anything that needs to be fixed or whatever. So next slide.
Okay. I don't understand this entirely. Show webinar.
Oh, okay. I thought you're saying this, you
I'm not
didn't
having-
understand the slide, and I thought.
Right. So that's why I keep going back to this thing, and it's not. Let's see if it'll go now. There we go. Yeah, no, it wasn't advancing. When I hide the toolbar, it stops advancing. So now
it wouldn't be a Zoom meeting if everything worked perfectly.
That's right. We love technology.
Anyway, I don't want to read all of the boxes here necessarily. This will be available, as Robin said, through National RTAP. But basically, we've got a phase 1, a phase 2, and then a phase 3. And phase 1 is really gathering information. And we're just about at the end of task 1, which is really defining the context. What is the industry like today? What are the available federal funding programs? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about tasks 1, 4 in particular here as we get to a little later in this presentation. Task 2, I'm going to highlight that it's coming at you. We're going to do a survey of the states. And actually that box hasn't got everything in it because we're also going to be surveying bus operators. And this is really to find out what the states are doing with the program, how they've organized it, how they match it, how they decide what services to fund, and what kind of results they've gotten and what works and what doesn't. Once we have that in hand, phase 2 is really to develop a whole series of planning tools and guidelines that will draw on what we learned from the states and what we know from the context and from other sources. And then task 4 is really to come back to that idea of presenting some particular programs that are kind of types that one might model and presenting those in much more detail. And then phase 3 is really wrapping this all up into a final report. And our TCRP folks have told me that it has to be one report. They're not going to make 3 reports out of this. Our project team is the KFH group. I'm working on it. Will Sutton, some of you know, he's our deputy principal investigator. The team has expanded a little bit since this slide was done. We have Jill Hogue now working with us. At David Evans and Associates, Steve Abernathy, and he's got a couple of coworkers that'll be helping him. And at Environmental Design International, Michael Buting, who knows the network very well and was instrumental in developing the first national ABRA, American Intercity Bus Riders Association, CAD map of the network. And he's been working with us on the context. So next slide. Our timeline, and of course, we've already slipped a bit. We're coming up on our quarterly panel meeting next week with the panel, and we're going to be talking mainly about the surveys so that we can get started on that for phase 2. But basically, we're looking at a 2-year overall project plan that would wind up in August of 2026. And our key dates are end of June to get the interim report, which hopefully will document the state surveys to the panel and have that done. And then we'll be providing the guidelines and the more detailed case studies more in the early part of or latter part of 2026 and early 2026, latter 2025, early part of 2026. So this is kind of the overall plan, but we got a lot of work to do on the surveys of the states and the bus operators. So that is going to really occupy a big part of our effort in the near future.
Do we want to move through this?
Yeah, moving. So task 1, defining the context. Basically, there's 4 tasks to it. One is a history of the intercity bus industry, which I'm kind of updating. I'm just kind of surprised. There's a fair amount of history since 2002. And also I've enjoyed going back to some of the early history of the industry to help frame how we got to what we think of as the intercity bus network. Task 1-2 is really trying to define and illustrate the role of the intercity bus network and intercity bus service. And as part of that, we've developed our own national map of what we are calling the intercity bus network. It's a national map that we've developed from drawing on a number of different sources. It's a work in progress. It's a combination of GIS and GTFS, some routes that we drew, a number of things we took from open source places like Transitland. We've relied on the TDS MMC network information map, which I commend to all of you to look at and monitor, because it's an updated map that includes a very large portion of this. And of course, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics Intercity Bus Atlas, which is the ongoing effort to develop a national intercity bus map that would be housed at the US DOT. So this is just one example. We're trying to use this to define the coverage. We're going to talk about the frequency, about some of the other recent issues and developments in this context. And then 1-3 is really to talk about federal regulations, and that's largely the FMCSA and Surface Transportation Board. And 1-4 is current federal programs and how they affect intercity bus and the states. Task 2, the survey of the states and the bus industry. The panel requested that we survey the bus industry as well. And basically, we're developing the survey. We've got draft surveys and a strategy. What we want to do is send a survey to each state that's fairly open-ended and should allow each state to really describe its program, and then set up an interview and come back and really ask questions so that we're sure that we understand it and document those programs. Bus industry, we're interested in focusing on the carriers that have been involved one way or another, whether they're currently 5311F or they provide scheduled service and they're interested in it. So building that list is a little a little more different than, we know what the 50 states are. So we're working on that aspect as well. I'll be talking at the National Bus Traffic Association next week, and I'm hoping to get cooperation through them as well. So this is really what the surveys are. Again, it's for the bus industry, it's going to be a fairly open-ended survey of what you know about the programs, what your involvement's been with it, and what information you'd like to know. So we want to get those surveys out in the near future and then get to compiling that information. Task 3 is really developing the planning tools and guidelines. And the topics that are listed down the left side are really the ones that were in the proposal. And think of it as a collection of guidebooks or tools that can be used in developing different aspects of an intercity bus program. And there's quite a list. There's, as you can see, we start with the FTA program requirements, but if you roll down onto the next slide, I think there's more information, more topics as well. So we have a lot of homework to do on that. Robin, if you can.
Let me see if I can do this. I'm having such a hard time. I don't know why. Here it is. Okay. There we go. This is the next slide. Are you seeing that? Yeah.
And so this is the rest of that list of kind of guidebook topics that we are planning to follow. So anyway, that's those are the high points of those tasks. You want to jump to the next one? As you can see, there's a lot there. And this is a typo, actually. This is actually task 1.4, looking back at it. But this is kind of the highlights of what we're including in the task 1.4. A lot of it is focusing on the new section 5311F circular, which we all know is 9040.1H. We just call it H for short. And chapter 9 is the intercity bus chapter. And for those of you that are familiar with the program or previous circulars, it really continues many of the previous program elements. States must continue to have to spend 15% of their overall 5311 funding allocation on intercity bus projects, unless they certify that there's no unmet rural intercity bus needs. If it certifies or intends to certify, it must have conducted a study of the adequacy of intercity bus service within the previous 4 years. And it needs to conduct a consultation process involving intercity bus carriers and other stakeholders, which must be described in the state management plan, but it really needs to use that consultation process as the basis for deciding that it's certifying or doing a partial certification. It also must offer the opportunity for carriers to apply for funding under the program on an ongoing basis. So those are pretty much elements that have continued. Now, in-kind match is, when you first hear this whole concept, you think this is too complicated or too crazy. But federal assistance for operating for transit projects has a ceiling that no more, the federal share cannot be any more than 50% of the net operating deficit. So the other 50% of the net operating deficit has to come from, broadly defined, from local shares, a non-federal source. For this program, a project, and this happened since TCRP 79 was written, FTA first developed a pilot project, and then it became part of the statutes for Section 5311 that allow the value of unsubsidized connecting bus service to be calculated and counted as the local match. And that the definition of the project includes both the subsidized route segment and the unsubsidized connecting part that is the match, generating the match. In the new circular, FTA has tried to help us out by providing a more simplified way to calculate the value of the unsubsidized connecting service. And basically, it's calculating the route length of the unsubsidized segment, multiplying it by the number of annual service days, the daily frequency. That gives you the overall annual mileage, and you multiply that by the cost per mile, fully allocated cost per mile of the unsubsidized service. And that gives you a dollar value. And then you have to look back at the segment that you're planning to subsidize, figure out what its net operating deficit would be, and put those two numbers together. Now, one of the difficulties that people have a hard time wrapping their minds around is that this match is basically a paper value. It's not dollars. So what you have to do is engineer your unsubsidized and your subsidized segment lengths sufficiently that the unsubsidized segment provides enough match that you can actually pay most of the net operating deficit or all of the net operating deficit on the subsidized segment out of the federal share of the overall project. We're going to work to define this in our guidebook and try to make it simple and comprehensible and provide some worksheets that people can use to figure this. But it is a continuing feature of this program that's really been instrumental in changing it and making it much more usable all over the country. We either have a lot of questions on this or you're just so stunned. Now, one of the other things that changed with the H version of the program, commuter bus service has never been eligible for Section 5311F funding. Section 5311 funding can be used for commuter service. Other federal programs, depending on urbanized service in urbanized areas or whatever, 5307 could be used for commuter bus service. But 5311F, not for commuter bus service. But there was never a definition of what constitutes commuter bus service. So now there's a definition. Services in which more than 50% of the riders return the same day over the course of a year. And I think the over the course of a year is just intended to show, if that happens a few days a month or a few days a year, it's not commuter service. But if it's a regular thing, that makes it commuter service and it's not eligible. Some states, this is an issue because there's a lot of services that have some intercity riders, but carry a lot of commuters as well. We all have seen a lot of the publicity about difficulty with intercity bus facilities over the past year and a half. We've done some webinar discussion of that before, but one of the things that FTA has done in its new guidance is really provide some language that addresses the need for reasonable access to FTA funded facilities. And basically it says recipients of FTA funds may not deny reasonable access to private intercity bus operators that in their federally funded public transportation facilities. But it does also include some guidance that FTA recipients can consider in determining whether access is a reasonable and prudent thing to do. And that includes looking at whether it would be detrimental to the existing public transit services that use it, the physical constraints of the facility, the scheduling and resource availability, and safety and security. So there's a number of issues to be considered, but there is language that the intention of FTA intermodal facilities was that they be intermodal, and that FTA transit operators that have built these with federal funds need to look at providing reasonable access. Now, there's also some more guidance on the next slide about funding for intercity bus facilities. And again, there's a lot of words on this slide. A lot of the issue with intercity bus facilities that serve rural areas, the facilities are actually in urbanized areas. And as we know, the federal transit programs are very much divided into a rural-urban divide. And in general, Section 5311, which are rural funds, are intended to support and benefit residents of rural areas, non-urbanized areas. So you can actually spend 5311F dollars to build or improve facilities for intercity bus that are in urbanized areas, but the amount of funding that you can put into those projects is limited to those aspects that really support and advance and benefit the services to and from the rural areas. And that's kind of a nebulous concept, but I think if you think about it, you realize that routes that are serving non-urbanized places need to get into those urbanized stops to provide connections and allow people to make further trips. And improving some of those things is certainly something you can do with 5311F money in proportion to their rural aspects. If you want to just jump back for just a second, Robin, if you can do that. I don't know, technical. The other thing is there is an issue that is kind of technical. Intercity bus is not defined in the FTA programs as public transportation. It's a separate thing. And that limits what you can do with, say, Section 5307 or other urbanized area programs, because they are restricted to funding public transportation facilities. So there's reasonable access could apply to a facility that was funded with 5307. But if you want to build a bus shelter and a bus pullout in a 5307 urbanized facility, you would need to use your 5311F dollars for it. Bottom line is 5311F funding for facilities must benefit and support the service to and from the rural areas, whether you build the facility in an urbanized area or in a rural area. Technical funding things, but these are the things that make projects feasible or not feasible. So jump ahead, Robin. The ADA requirements are spelled out a little bit more in this new H program. Intercity bus is fixed route, fixed schedule by definition. Even if it's operated by private entities, it's subject to ADA over-the-road bus regulations that it must be readily accessible if it's fixed route, and that holds true for 5311F funded services. Complementary paratransit, ADA complementary paratransit is not required for intercity bus service. That's now explicit in the regulations. And there's additional information about other types of vehicles that would be operated being subject to the ADA regulations, depending on the size of the vehicle and whether it's demand response or not. Basically, all fixed route services, except those operated with automobiles, must be accessible. So anyway, to me, the other part of that is any 5311F provider is standing in the shoes of a public entity. And in general, everything needs to be accessible. Interstate projects, FTA has finally put in some explicit language saying that it supports the idea that states should work together. States need to support their intrastate network, but they need to provide for connections to the national network. And that might include interstate service, and FTA is encouraging the states to work with each other to coordinate services and perhaps do joint projects. And we'll be looking for that in the survey, where some examples of that have been worked out and what the benefits of that are. So anyway, just to jump back to Project B52, we're coming right up on that end of that first quarter, and we really want to focus on getting those surveys out. And what we really want are all of the states to complete the survey and get it back to us very quickly. And the same thing for bus operators. And one thing I was going to ask for, and I didn't check with Avery, our panel chair, on this, is I'd like to get, we don't have on our panel very much representation in the way of bus operators. And I'd like at least 2 bus operators to just put their contact information in the chat and volunteer to look at the survey over the next week so that we can get some feedback on whether you think it asks the right questions and whether bus operators would be willing to fill that out. Is that okay, Avery? Is that good?
That sounds great. Yes, Fred.
Okay, that's anyway. We're rolling on B52. We want input from everybody, input from what you've been doing. We'd like to know what information you think would be useful and helpful to get in the overall project. You can see we've got a lot of runway ahead of us on this project, but we're going. So thank you for your attention.
Fantastic, Fred. Yeah, this is the thing about this report is it's going to be a watershed. It's going to be a bookmarked experience for Intercity Bus. And so I think as much as you put into it and as much as you give Fred good information, he can then reflect that out to a much larger audience. And I think that that's the super important thing is this is secret transportation in a lot of ways, and the understanding about the relationship between the federal programs and the private intercity bus programs is very limited. So doing a good job on a report like Fred's doing gives us a chance to really get the information out and help more people understand the benefit. And in that vein, Avery and Hart are going to tell us about what's going on with intercity bus in Virginia and North Carolina. Would you like to control your own slides?
Robin, if you could advance, that would be great.
Okay, I'm all in.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Wow, just what a privilege it is to be with you here today, really alongside peers and industry experts across the nation. It really is a privilege. As mentioned, my name is Avery Daugherty, and I oversee the Intercity Bus Program for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, known as the Virginia Breeze Bus Lines. And I'm joined by my friend across the North Carolina border, Mr. Hart Evans.
Hey everybody.
Yeah.
Hart Evans, North Carolina Department of Transportation's Integrated Mobility Division. I'm the statewide planning and program manager. So the Intercity Bus Program is one of the programs that I oversee.
Yeah, thank you, Hart. And I would be remiss, I just wanted to give a couple of shout outs in the audience today. Is my colleague with DRPT, Raquel Aguirre, who assists me with the Virginia Breeze Intercity Bus Program. So nice to see her in the audience, as well as someone that I've worked with for a while, Mr. Mike Waters, who's also been a great partner with the Coach USA team that we've contracted since the beginning of the Virginia Breeze in Virginia. So today, Hart and I are going to be briefly discussing a recent collaborative effort between Virginia and North Carolina to connect our 2 systems and really help to strengthen the national intercity bus network. Next slide, please. Yeah, great. A brief background just on the Virginia Breeze. It was launched a little over 8 years ago in 2017 with one route along the I-81 corridor in the Shenandoah Valley and connected to Washington, D.C. We expanded in 2020 and added 2 routes connecting the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, the New River Valley, and the Piedmont and Southern Racing corridors in Virginia. And again in 2021, November, we added a 4th route, expanding again on the I-81 corridor, stretching to the Highlands region in beautiful Bristol, Virginia. We do utilize in-kind match, and our service is funded through FTA 5311F funding and ticket sales. Our current contractor for all 4 routes currently is Dillon's Bus Service, which is a company owned by Coach USA, who also owns and operates Megabus. Hart, I'm going to turn it to you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Avery. Oh, if you can go back one. Yep. Okay. So North Carolina's Intercity Bus Program, we have 11 routes. We currently have Greyhound operate 7 of our routes, and Sunway Charters operates 4 of our routes. We do use 5311F funds, state funds, and in-kind match to fund our program. And right now, the Virginia Breeze has seen a lot of success in their branding and calling it the Virginia Breeze with their nice wrap buses. And so we are also working on a brand with consistent standards that's recognizable throughout the state. to really get this program up and off the ground even more than what we've seen. We are seeing ridership increase since COVID, which is always good news to hear. And we are also diving deep into all the 50 to 60 stops we have throughout the state to make sure that they are located and connected to the multimodal network. I know a lot of people are familiar with a lot of intercity bus stops being put on the periphery of cities, at gas stations and stuff. So we want to kind of change that conversation and have the state DOT kind of be a part of those negotiations for stops again, to get intercity stops located back in the city centers and in rural city centers too, that are walkable and bikeable and connected to other small scale transit. Next slide.
Yeah, so today, just a quick map on what the Virginia Breeze intercity bus service looks like. Each route you can see connects to Washington, D.C. And then the next slide is what we are excited to share that soon we will have in fiscal year 2026. One slide back, if you could, Robin, where we're going to be adding a route called the Tidewater Current. So we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And then that purple map, next slide. So I think this is a really important point, and I really wanted to talk about how the whole North Carolina, Virginia connection effort really kind of stemmed from. Every ride matters for intercity bus, and when we have a locality, in this case, the city of Danville really spearheaded in Virginia, Danville, Virginia, spearheaded a conversation and brought essentially the two states together, which has been on a long-going plan of ours to connect and try to see how we can best integrate our services. But it was really the catalyst of Danville doing this. So it was through a regional feasibility study, bus feasibility study started by Danville, which identified the desire to connect their community across state lines with regional bus service to Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Reedsville. And as you can see, very small on that map, Danville is right on the North Carolina border, so it actually makes more sense for them, for some residents there, to have a need to travel more south than north in our state. And this really led to the coordination of meetings with Danville and North Carolina and Virginia. Hart, going to turn it back over to you. We're going to talk about, I think, intercity bus service in North Carolina.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so as you can see by this map here, we have a pretty comprehensive network throughout the state with service for intercity bus. But at the northern part of the state, before this nice gray line for our new service was there, we did have a gap in service to many parts of Virginia. There are some unsubsidized connections into Virginia that Greyhound and Barron's Bus currently provides, but for our subsidized service, there wasn't that. When we were doing a gap analysis of our network, one of the things we noticed when we started looking at neighboring states and their service was that, and I probably don't want to steal too much of the information from my next slide, but there were two routes that stopped in Danville, and we were very close to Danville. So we're still looking to expand our network and create those connections more. And I think this should be the next slide, please.
Yeah, so I'll take this one, Hart, and then I think the one afterwards is where you're going to go into a little bit more detail. But really just quickly summarizing, through this collaboration birthed a new route, which Hart's going to talk about in just a minute. And with North Carolina leading the way with their intercity bus service, kind of filling their gap he was just talking about, that will connect Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Reedsville, North Carolina to Danville, Virginia. Passengers can continue northbound, exciting to hear this, can continue either west to Martinsville or east to South Boston, Farmville, Richmond, DC, or they can take another route for the Virginia Breeze that'll travel along the US 29 corridor, stopping in places like Lynchburg, Charlottesville, Culpeper, Warrenton, and Dulles International Airport and Union Station. So Hart, going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. Yeah, so like I was mentioning, there's a short gap in the network and needs for additional connection north. We were very close to Danville and could connect into that service pretty easily, it seemed like. So it was kind of on our board for 2025 to start the service. We did have some extra funds available, so we were exploring that. And then Danville reached out about their bus service feasibility study that looked into enhanced connections into Greensboro and had a stakeholder survey for transit dependent riders. There was a great need to connect into North Carolina. So that paired with our early on efforts to connect with Virginia kind of started that conversation early, and we started saying, okay, I think we should do this sooner rather than later. So that kind of prompted us to kind of look at the beginning of January as a launch date, since we had the funds ready to go and we had Sunway charters ready and chomping at the bit to start the service. I guess we did have some challenges, but then we also had some successes in this situation as well. I'll touch on. So before this situation, before this partnership, the Virginia Breeze routes, you cannot book a single ticket connected to any kind of North Carolina services. So for right now, we worked with interlining the one Sunway route, which is the Triad Danville connector, with the Megabus system, and now you can buy one ticket that gets you across state lines, and we hope to work on that in the future with additional routes. And then, the next thing was communicating with all partners. As the state DOT, we have connections with Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Reidsville, and then as well with Danville, but it does require a lot of communication, even with just 4 municipalities, to kind of make sure that the timetables and stuff line up to fit into the transit centers. And then, of course, there's always that anxiety that comes with additional intercity travel into certain transit facilities. So we had to kind of make sure that those concerns were addressed. So monthly check-ins with DRPT and others as needed was definitely very helpful in this process. Some other challenges we had were last-minute route changes. We flipped back and forth to try to connect with Virginia Breeze perfectly, and then we had some other services that we wanted to connect with as well on our side. So we did have to send a bunch of emails back and forth at the last minute to make sure that we had the schedules lined up good. But we did 2 days worth of dry runs before we launched the service, and that was very helpful to kind of make sure that our estimates and stuff with traffic and timing were on par with what we had expected and predicted. And then the last thing was, getting the word out for this. How do we let people know in the areas that this is a new service? A lot of times with intercity bus, it seems like a new route is launched and, we kind of let go of the marketing piece. So, we really leaned on the locals here and transit agencies and partners and did a press release to really make sure that word got out in the communities that we're serving on this route, that they not only can connect to these cities, but then they also can connect directly to other parts of the national intercity bus network. So I think part of what we pitched to Greensboro and Winston-Salem was, not only are you being able to get to Reidsville and Danville, you're also able now to get to Richmond, Charlottesville, DC, and beyond. So that was something big to push there. And then this next slide kind of just shows you the schedule and some of our marketing materials that we had. We have to be in Danville at 7:15 a.m. Or I guess in this case 7:30 a.m. to meet with the Virginia Breeze bus. One departs Danville at 7:30 a.m. and the next departs at 8 a.m. So that was really making sure that we were there by that time to make that seamless connection and not have people waiting too long. And then the same thing in the afternoon, where we had to make sure that we waited long enough to make sure that both Virginia Breeze buses were back from Richmond and Charlottesville, respectively, to make sure that we could then take passengers back into North Carolina. So that's why we then leave Danville at 7:15 p.m.
Yeah, so really just kind of, this is a little bit of a repeat of what Hart said, but just I wanted to hit a little bit more on this marketing and communication effort. I think that some of you may have seen a press release. I think it was just a beautiful piece, and it was a great example too of the 2 DOTs and their communications teams coming together to make sure that we really had that information shared and picked up across different medias and channels to let people know of it as part of what Hart was saying in terms of getting the word out. But I just wanted to say too, I think a key takeaway with this whole experience, and Hart, please feel free to chime in, is don't feel, I guess, don't be afraid to take a risk and to rip the Band-Aid off. And it's always, there's always going to be something that will come up in terms of how do we bridge this gap? But until you actually go forward and try it, there's going to be some adjustments and lessons learned. But ultimately, for the betterment of, again, the individual rider, every ride matters. Now being able to connect someone from Greensboro all the way to New York is a very significant thing. And we're just super excited to have gone through this and kind of continued a lesson forward in how we're going to expand and add to the intercity bus network in our service. Next slide, please. And this is just a shameless plug, again, mentioning the Tidewater Current. Another example of how I think this partnership is going to continue with North Carolina DOT and their contracted partners there. We are excited to be expanding in Virginia, looking to add what we call the Tidewater Current, which will stretch along the I-64 corridor from the Shenandoah Valley all the way to the Hampton Roads region. We're going to be offering bi-directional east to west service 365 days a year. And we fully intend on working closely with our neighbors south of the border in North Carolina to establish a connection in Norfolk, Virginia, which is currently served by North Carolina's intercity bus service. Hart, back to you.
Thank you. So just a few other wins for intercity bus in North Carolina. We did have to terminate service in Elizabeth City a few months prior, and recently we worked with Elizabeth City State University. So we, college riders are a big demographic in intercity bus ridership, and the university wanted to work with us to establish a stop closer to campus, so their students could utilize that and actually move it closer to the city center. So you can kind of see on the map to the right, the old location was in a gas station way up north of the city, and then we moved it south closer to the city center on a satellite part of the campus. So service resumed on November 20th, and we worked with Greyhound to get those agreements in place to get that service back up and running. So we look forward to kind of partnering more with universities in the future to make sure that we serve everybody. So just wanted to kind of note that quick win that was recent. And then next slide, please. And then just kind of, touch again on our existing route. We already have the Coastal Plains Connector route, which goes into Myrtle Beach and then heads into Norfolk. But, this is something that we haven't really coordinated much with the other states on. We just provide the service, and then it's kind of been up to the riders to kind of then piece together their next connection. But like Avery said, with their new Tidewater Current route, we're looking forward to working very closely with them to really integrate our route with their route, so there's more seamless connectivity there, and really work with our partners in the South too in the future to make sure that that these connections are made. But I think it's important to note too that what I said in a media interview earlier today was, our transportation, the riders, the state boundaries are arbitrary. And I think when we plan and communicate these things, we should act that way too, and we should not stop at the state lines for things. And I look forward to our continued partnership with Virginia to make sure that, riders don't really take much notice when they cross state lines, and they have a seamless intercity bus experience.
Very well said, Hart. And this is my contact information. I absolutely love and value the relationships I've been able to forge in this industry, and I really do welcome you to reach out to me anytime if I can be of any assistance. And I thank you for the privilege of your time.
Super, thank you, Avery and Hart. See, here's Hart's information. The next person up is Jonah Freeman, and he's going to be running his own slideshow. So I'm going to stop share. I'm going to stop share and then start share with, I think Jonah should be able to, yeah, there we go. Approve. There we go. Super. Go, Jonah.
Hey,
You should be able to share your screen and run your slides.
okay, 1 second. Let me pull that up. Okay.
I want to remind people that these slides and this presentation will be available on the National RTAP website. It'll be posted in our Intercity last page, but also if you go to YouTube and search National RTAP Intercity Bus, you should get all of our webinars, but this one will be included as well. So I'm just remember, Kara told me that you were going to run your own slides. If I have your slides, then I'm happy to run them.
Yeah, I think your slides, my slides are actually in your slideshow, so I'm
Would that
gonna,
be easier?
yeah, I don't know what's happening here with the slideshow system, but it's
Okay,
not
and I'll
working.
pull the next, go to the next slide. There we go. Here we go. Okay, Jonah.
Okay, thank you, Robin. And I'm Jonah Friedman with the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State. I work with Kai Monist. And before I get started on my slides, I would just like to point out that the accomplishments of NC DOT and DRPT in putting together this collaborative effort for this route, it doesn't happen as often as you would hope in other states. And it really is a tribute to their efforts and their initiative in getting these routes connected and initiating this Danville connection for North Carolina. And you know, it really is a model for other states to work off of in connecting. So props to them. So I'm going to talk about North Carolina specifically, staying Southeast centric in our presentations. So first off, this is North Carolina's unsubsidized network. These are the routes that were missing from Hart's slide with our subsidized network, which I'll have in the slides as well. But these routes really function as the trunk of North Carolina's intercity service network. We built a lot of our subsidized service off of these routes, and they really connect us to the nationwide network. They go all the way out to Dallas and New York and Atlanta. And our subsidized service is really designed to make meaningful connections to these routes. Next slide. So what are North Carolina's barriers to full intercity bus service provision? Well, I think for us and for most every other state, the primary barrier is the limited state and local match funds. North Carolina has a few other specifics with a significant rural area with a low population density, which makes for unprofitable intercity service areas, and a limited capacity for our local transit agencies to provide that intercity bus service. But really, we need providers to provide that service, and for the state to be able to match those federal funds, it's quite a lift. So next slide. So that's where in-kind match comes in. North Carolina has been utilizing in-kind match since its inception in 2010, since North Carolina's intercity bus service inception. And in determining how to use in-kind match in the state, it's important to sort of weigh the trade-offs. So while it does not require a state or local match if you can get full in-kind match for the federal funds. It does reduce your total 5311 funds, or the drawdown comes out of your 5311 funds. So that is less 5311 funding you can allocate toward your local transit agencies. But FTA requires that you expend 15% of your 5311 funds on intercity bus service, unless you want to write a governor's certification that your needs are met, which I think most states cannot write. So those funds really are supposed to be dedicated to intercity bus. Some other things to consider are the limitations of the unsubsidized routes that are currently pledged to other states, and Don will talk about how to address that. But North Carolina is particularly well positioned to have unsubsidized routes connecting into the state because of our location on the East Coast, sort of central and functioning as a hub for a lot of intercity service. So next slide. So this is that slide that Hart showed earlier of our subsidized service network. But all of our in-kind match actually comes from out-of-state connecting segments. And so the unsubsidized segment, an unsubsidized segment from Atlanta, Georgia to Raleigh actually provides the in-kind match for our Raleigh to Jacksonville service. And the same goes for our Asheville to Raleigh route. The Memphis, Tennessee to Asheville segment actually provides the in-kind match for that. So you do not need to have a specific segment fund your in-kind match or provide that pledged amount. And then in-kind match is a great funding mechanism because it really does provide a consistent source of funding. As long as that unsubsidized segment that you're getting in-kind match from doesn't go away, you can really use the in-kind match as a long-range planning tool because you know that funding is going to stay consistent. It's always going to be there funding year after funding year. And really the purpose of that makes a lot of sense because these intercity bus unsubsidized services really have no use unless there are internal state routes that the unsubsidized network connects to. So it does make sense for the federal government to want to provide that match. And we're back there. Thank you, Robin. So why is in-kind match specifically important to North Carolina? Well, these are our two coverage maps of with in-kind match funding and without in-kind match funding. And you can see a significant portion of our state would not have intercity bus service without in-kind match. In North Carolina, we leveraged over $5 million in in-kind match in just fiscal year 2025. So that's 7 of our 11 routes that had in-kind match supporting them. Without in-kind match, our riders, our intercity riders, would lose almost 1,800 daily service miles and almost 114,000 annual trips, which accounts for $10 million in 5311F. And that's just in one fiscal year. So draw that out to all of the years we have been utilizing in-kind match, and that's a lot of funding that our state would be foregoing, passing up. So this is the overarching intercity bus network map of North Carolina and our subsidized service paired with our unsubsidized service. And we're really proud of the coverage that our service provides, and it really is, it speaks to the effort of our DOT staff and our officials here in North Carolina who care about this, and the expertise of the people that have been working on intercity bus in our state for a long time. And to in-kind match specifically for enabling this coverage and this amount of service to happen in our state. And so if you aren't currently utilizing in-kind match, you should be, and Don will speak to how it is that you go about that. Thank you.
Jonah? one of the things, this is Robin, I just think that the other part of this is that you've strengthened the non-subsidized parts of your service. And that one of the benefits, it's both benefits the rural communities and it benefits the intercity bus operators with feeder routes and access to more passengers than they would have if they were not working with the state.
Absolutely. Yeah. And feeder service is sort of the intention behind in-kind match as well. The subsidized services are supposed to feed more riders into the unsubsidized network and keep them unsubsidized.
Yay. Okay. Super. Dawn, are you ready to go? This is you?
Yeah, this is me. But thank you very much, everybody. I'm wresting the microphone away from the East Coast, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest up here. I'm Don Chartok. I'm the Deputy Director for the Public Transportation Division at WashDOT. Our brand is Travel Washington here in state of Washington. Nina Stoker is the brains of our intercity bus operation, and she is also on the call. With the possible exception of this very moment, as we figure out what the slew of executive orders this week are going to do to all of our programs, the last decade has been one of growth in federal financial investment in rural and intercity transportation. This has been corresponded with the growing need for us as states to subsidize and keep, let alone increase the level of service that's able to be provided by the private carriers. With the combination of these factors, many states are now considering how they can better support and or come up with the match. Next slide. So one of the ways we can do that is through the use of in-kind. You've heard a couple of examples. You've heard Fred, you've heard North Carolina talk about their use of in-kind match. And I saw one of the questions that was in the type is about, oh, who documents the in-kind match? See that last bullet. That documentation of the in-kind match comes from the unsubsidized provider. And just to kind of take a step back for a second on, what is in-kind match? Most of us who are in the grant-making world know, who are used to using in-kind, know it has to be part of the project and it has to come from a third party to be in-kind normally. And I think that trips some of us up when we're thinking about how do we use in-kind in the case of intercity bus. So, for example, traditionally, we've considered intercity bus projects about city pairs. It's to get to this point to this point. But really, and you kind of heard that in some of the presentations, intercity bus is really not just about getting between two cities. It's about making connections wherever you need to get to it. You heard Avery talk about it. And so if you accept that, and we made this argument to FTA about 20 years ago. Some of the key veterans on this call have made this argument to FTA, and we got agreement that, so if you accept that intercity bus is not about the city pair, but about getting to the network, then you should consider the unsubsidized service that the subsidized service is connecting with in a meaningful way as match. And eventually we got folks to agree that that made sense. Next slide. So, yes. So I'll use an example here in Washington. So here we have one of our Travel Washington Gold Line, and it goes from Kettle Falls, which is in the northeast corner of the state of Washington, down to the city of Spokane, making connections there to lots of different service. And in this case, and it's really important to point out that the provider, Northwestern Trailways, is shoot, that's not the provider. It's a different private provider, but I've blanked on it at the moment. But it's not Greyhound. That was my point. And in this case, what we do is we use the in-kind match value from Greyhound in order to count it. So let's go to that next slide and let's see this. And go ahead and click on the animation. Give me one more click, Robin. There you go. And so that red dotted line shows where the service is connecting that Greyhound provides that we're able to use and count as the in-kind match. Now, a key point of this is it goes over the border into the state of Oregon. So we have two interesting things happening here. We have both Greyhound providing match for another provider, Central Washington Airporter, and we also have go across a border. And so this kind of creates an interesting question that we pose on the next slide, which is how do we know? How does a state know? So if I'm a state and I'm considering using in-kind match, and a private provider comes to us and says, oh, we can provide in-kind match, and it connects here and it goes into another state. So we have two different issues that we need to address when we hear that. We got to make sure, oh, how do I know that it's real? That service is out there. And the other question is, and in this example of us going across the border into Oregon, how do I know that somebody else in another state isn't already counting that match for their in-kind service? And so we've discussed this a little bit as a group, the folks here, and then also within our AASHTO state management group, discuss, okay, how do we do that? And that's basically the Dons and Averys from across the country. How do we create a way where we can verify and vet the in-kind match that's out there? And so working with our partners, a lot of the folks on this call, Greyhound, others, we think we're proposing to run a pilot where we will have a database on the AASHTO website, and it will be a way for us to, it'll be behind a paywall, and it'll be a way for us to verify that, oh, yeah, Don double checked to make sure that the state of Oregon isn't claiming those same miles. It'll be and I think you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And you can see here, you basically be able to go down and filter over city pairs, over schedule number, and be able to kind of see what things are already carried. And we'll also have a name of a state person. So let's say in my case, it might be Nina, who goes in and verifies each of these lines that we are using as a state match. And so that way our bordering states, whether it be Oregon or Idaho, are able to see, either Nina is already counting that in-kind match or they are not. And we are able to kind of then feel better about using that in-kind match from whoever the private provider might be. And let's see. And then, so we're kind of in the works right now to figure out how we're going to do this. We have a couple of volunteers, some of which are on this call, to kind of test this out and have us, have the private provider provide the information. It goes into AASHTO's behind their paywall, where only state DOTs will have access to it to go in and do the verification work and share with each other. And so we're just right now getting ready to give it a go in the next few weeks. And I think that is it.
Yay, Q&A time. So we have, let's see, we've got some questions in the Q&A. For in-kind, who calculates the fully allocated cost per mile? It seems like this would be the heaviest lift in taking advantage of in-kind and a state's acceptance of that calculation and determining eligibility and use. Does one of the panel want to respond to that?
Sure. And so right now that information comes from the provider of the unsubsidized service. And so, and that is kind of where we're at right now. And one of the ways that we're trying to look to do an extra level of verification on.
The second one is for Avery and Hart. How are agencies communicating on the transfer of passengers? What did the training plan for staff look like?
Robin, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that question. Would you mind?
Are there so the question was, how are agencies communicating on the transfer of passengers? what did the training plan for staff look like? So you guys
Yes.
talked about how you were connecting, but really
Yeah.
on the ground, what's the
Right. Yeah, so no, that was a great question, and something we had to really think through. It's not something I would say, don't want to speak too much, but with the DOT, it's something we definitely rely on, helping to make sure that a communication plan exists between. And so we really just kind of, my role, at least in Virginia side, was just connecting the Coach USA folks with Sunway, and I know Hart played a role with that too. And they basically established what that process and procedure would look like and shared it with us. So what they do on days that we know that in Virginia, if we're running behind going down to Danville, we would their protocol is their dispatch would coordinate with Sunway directly, letting them know, hey, we are X number of minutes away, 30-minute delay, and they would make an educated decision as to whether they would hold the route, hold the bus for North Carolina to go back south. And if it was too long, there's also some.
You got muted for some reason. So we have a question from Brian Travis, and he wanted to know where we can find the recommendations from the FTA on the state's role in intercity bus. Is that something Fred or Dawn you would be able to answer? Hello?
Well, yeah, I would recommend looking at the circular 9040H. I know that sounds just kind of like deadly reading, but chapter 9 is actually pretty clear in a lot of ways. And that's where there is a section in there entitled state role. And that's where it talks about the state role is really supporting the development and maintenance of an intrastate network and interstate connections. It doesn't go a lot beyond that, though, to really have a vision. And what we're hoping to do is present kind of what states have done in that role as part of the B-52 project.
Yeah, I think you can look at the purpose statement, and that can help you understanding the need. for people in
The
rural areas.
national, the national program goals for section 5311F that are in chapter 9 there, I
Mhm.
think really are a pretty good description and fit the need.
Okay, let's see, Kirby Dearth, how are commuters' regulations enforced and tracked? So how does anybody look at what's being done or labeled as intercity bus or commuter bus and say, oh no, you're actually not eligible?
Well, let me just describe something that we've been working with New Jersey Transit, which is the agency that administers 5311 in New Jersey. There are some non-urbanized areas in New Jersey, and New Jersey Transit provides some service in them, and New Jersey Transit is also trying to figure out what's the best use of their 5311F dollars. And as part of that, we were looking at whether they could use some of that money to fund their own service that serves non-urbanized stops, or another carrier that provides some service into the non-urbanized area. And just to see whether, since the state's administering the funds, the state wanted to know whether there were these were really commuter routes and whether they could really use 5311F funding on them. And so we did some onboard surveys and basically asked people, where they lived, where they boarded. We mapped that back to whether it was urbanized or non-urbanized, and also what their destinations were. And, on some of the services, we found that basically a majority of the riders were boarding that bus every day and riding into Manhattan and then riding that bus back that same evening. So it was clearly that those were commuter services. So anyway, it's really up to the state to monitor that. Potentially, the state could be asked that question in a state management review if somebody looked at that service, or if another carrier objected and said you're using your funds to fund commuter bus service, and that's not appropriate. It would really be something they would raise with the state DOT and then with FTA. But there's no ongoing enforcement of that regulation yet. There's nobody out there monitoring and counting passengers. It's really up to the states to monitor their grants and provide the rationale for why they chose to spend their money this way or that way.
You want to add something, Don?
I was just going to say, in most cases, the line goes the opposite way
Yeah.
because it goes into their NTD formula for which they get funding. So the folks are more likely to lie and say something's a commuter service rather than an intercity bus service. So that being said, it's squishy, and I suspect lots of people don't really get the nuances and the differences.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can make a connection, and that may be the only connection out there. And I know I worked with the New Jersey service where they were creating a local connection to the commuter service so that there would be access that there wouldn't be otherwise. So using the commuter service as part of an intercity bus network can provide lower cost connectivity with higher frequency than saying we have to do something completely separate and new. So I think understanding who's in your network and the resources available is a big part of building that network out. Tim Terrian, are you still interested in giving us a question? I have allowed you to talk. You have to unmute yourself. I've given you, yeah, there we go. Super. Go, Tim. I'm not hearing you. Now you're muted, now you're not. I don't know why I'm not being able to hear you because you're unmuted. I've given you permission. This is technology. If you want, could you put your question into the Q&A and we'll make sure that it gets answered. I have another question from Michael Poulet. What measures or metrics do you use to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of intercity bus service? Don?
Sure. I was going to let somebody else give it a go. So the classic, this actually gets into a pet peeve of mine, which is about ridership. So of course, people will list ridership as a measure, and we should list ridership as a measure. We in our industry tend to rely too heavily on a ridership, in my opinion, especially when we're talking about access and how we create access for folks. The other key, some of the other key measures that we will use in intercity bus are number of meaningful connections, are the towns of a certain size that are connected into the intercity bus network so that various different places can have that access to the network. Those are some of the things that we look at.
We have.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please. Go
So
ahead.
this is Kai. I'm honest. I work at ITRI with Jonah, and I'm also the chair of the Intercity Bus Subcommittee for TRB's AP 055 Rural Intercity Bus and Specialized Transportation Committee. So we helped put this on, and I just want to thank everyone for coming, but also just to say, if you saw Jonah's slides, what he was pointing out more than anything was the area that we're covering and the population that we're covering, the miles we're providing. So like Don was saying, the trips have to come later. We have to build the network first, and the network has struggled recently. And so getting the network put back together, increasing the coverage and increasing the opportunity for people to travel is what we try to focus on. And the next level problem will be to increase the frequency and increase the trips. But first, we need to get that coverage figured out and the connectivity figured out.
Well, and I think to really emphasize, it's the rural to wherever question that you're trying to answer. How do you create rural access here? And it's partially that's the definition in the 5311 program, but partially the unsubsidized network is focused on where they can profitably provide access for passengers. And as that area has shrunk, so has the area that people have been able to access service. And so when we look at using federal funds to fill the gap between the public and the private interest, we want to look at how we're supporting rural access to everywhere else in the world. And most particularly, a lot of that is urbanized areas, because that's where you're getting food, medical, employment, healthcare. And these things are an important part of survival and doing well in rural and urban systems. So Jonah, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of piggyback off of what Kai is saying and focus on the intention of the 5311 program. A lot of times there's too much focus on the cost per mile or the cost per ride, and where the focus needs to be is providing service to as many people as possible in parts of the country that don't have access to opportunities. So that ride to someone in Ahoskie, North Carolina means so much more to that person than it does in any part of the urbanized areas of North Carolina. So the intention of those funds should be the focus of where you're putting your money.
Super. Next question. This thing. Do intercity carriers across the country have their GTFS? And is that published to a shared database? Are the shapes data used to confirm total miles, etc., help in the forthcoming database verification? Does anyone have some answers around this? I know that if you go in, Fred might have some ideas, and maybe Stephanie.
Right. Yeah.
We're doing with the national transit map or the national intercity bus map.
Well, right now not all carriers have GTFS data, and not all the ones that have GTFS data provided as an open source kind of thing to a shared database. But the TDS MMC map of all of the interline carriers that are participating in the TDS interlining system is one good place where you could get the miles. The BTS Atlas, we're hoping that it develops and fleshes out so that it would have that as well. It has a lot of data in it, and there's an update coming. Don or Stephanie, I don't know how you want to tie that availability of that data to the
It doesn't.
in-kind allocation.
It doesn't. It's not even the purpose of that database is not to create a map or GTFS. It is simply for a state to determine whether or not a route segment of a particular schedule is available or unavailable for in-kind match. That makes it unsubsidized, otherwise unsubsidized, and otherwise unpledged. So it's not to put together a map or shapes or anything of that nature. Do you want to take the next one?
Well, I would like to just also add that if you're a carrier on this call and you're interested in developing GTFS data or getting your information into Google so that it's publicly accessible and connected to any transit in the area, that the National RTAP GTFS builder is available, and we have a subject matter expert who's there to help you make that happen. It's not rocket science, it's just moving data around in an Excel spreadsheet. Don, did you want to add something?
Oh, I would just say that the providers in Washington State all provide this information and put this information into GTFS. Like many folks who live in the 5311 world, it is a struggle to make sure it's kept up to date and constant, but it is stuff we work on.
Hey, Lawrence Hughes. It appears that the Washington State DOT's presentation identified Flix as being a source of in-kind match, but Flix is not a private operator, it's a broker. how are states handling brokered bus service for in-kind match purposes? Where a broker arranges for service provided by a private operator, are agreements being signed with the broker or with the private operator?
Don, you want me to do that?
Well, I'll start because I know our example in Washington State, where so it is true that in this case it's a contracted service, right? And so that in part of the state, Flix had it. In part of the state, Greyhound provides some service, and part of the state, other contractors provide service, and we then work with that contractor to verify the information. And so now Stephanie can correct me anything I said wrong in that.
The Flix is not providing match. The carrier operating the service is providing the
Yes, right.
That's very specific to the carrier, not the not Flix as a provider of technology and ticketing. So it is a carrier providing match.
Okay, we have another question here. Can you share the link where this presentation will be shared? Once more, it will be shared on our nationalrtap.org website. So if you go to nationalrtap.org and type in Intercity Bus or go to webinars, you will be able to access this presentation within within a week. Kara likes to go through and check things. I think she's done some 508 compliance already with the slides. So I think that this presentation should be available fairly soon. And let's see, maybe we can get Tim. He's unmuted, and do you still want to try talking, Tim, or do you think you can?
He said he didn't have a question. He was just clapping.
Oh, okay. That's
I do think that most of the comments in the chat are only going to the panelists, so other people can't see them.
okay. I just went through the Q&A first. I'm happy to go now to the questions I see in the chat. Is it possible to get a simple handout style document that explains how 5311F carrier can use in-kind match? I would like to have something to distribute to our state DOTs.
I think we can work on that.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. We have some discussion that's happening inside this discussion. We talked about the commuter regulations. Fred argued that every major city, blah, blah, blah. What other? Is it possible to, okay, that was does North Carolina also provide some state funding for local match? Need to let those legislators know how important that is to having all this coverage. Have some state dollars help support this kind of in-kind network. Dawn, do you want to talk about that? Then Stephanie?
I'm sorry, you caught me multitasking.
No,
Give
it's
it to
okay. I
me
think it's for
again.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
So yes, there are some state dollars in North Carolina that provide the local match for the routes where we don't use in kind. And yes, we are very thankful to have that money because it definitely opens up some important corridors on the map. So
I was just thinking that the presentation Jonah did is such a good one for how important in-kind is, but you need to keep your state legislators and policymakers aware that the other bucks they put in are really helpful too. So.
I'm just trying to weed out where there's some questions in here from people. I think that people have been really engaged with this webinar, and any questions you have later, please put those into the survey that's going to come out and that you will have access to. And we'll use that information for our putting our group together. We have some upcoming RTAP projects, the transportation update, which we just did, cost allocation tool, which is to help you do partnership, ADA changes, book discussion group, digital accessibility for transportation providers. I think that's a typo. And then our conference is coming up in Austin, Texas, the 7th. Basically, the main conference will be the 7th to the, I think, the 11th or 10th. And we'll have some trainings on the side. Please go to our webpage at nationalrtap.org. And if you have an idea for a session, even if you're not doing it, you can propose one that you want to see, and the program committee and our team will look at how we can get the people to talk about the issues you're interested in. This is an important, working with Intercity Bus is an important part of our program. And so we do want to have Intercity Bus operators, as well as the states building their statewide networks, participating in the discussion. You're welcome to contact me. I also will be presenting at the NBTA meeting in Philadelphia next week. And I'll bring a copy of our topic guide for Intercity Bus and some of our training catalogs, because those driver and other training materials are available to you as Intercity Bus operators. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate the good turnout, all of my co-presenters and the helpful people that have been on this from the TRB subcommittee and AASHTO and the state DOTs. You guys are fantastic. Let's keep this conversation going, and I'll look forward to talking to you all soon.